The snow had come down savage that Christmas Eve, thick as sifted flour, slow as falling ash. By dawn it lay on the fields of Giles County, Tennessee, like a pale burial cloth spread over the frozen earth. When the sun finally broke, weak and yellow as cold tallow, a farm boy named Eben Turner saw a shape half buried by the fence, the kind of strange obstruction that stops the heart before the mind catches up. He thought it was a fallen log. Then the log moved. There, at the edge of the Turner field, lay a woman curled around something small. She was barefoot. Her skin, dark against the snow, had gone the color of night water, the lips bluish and cracked. A cry rose from the bundle in her arms, the thin, insistent whimper of a newborn. Eben dropped his pail. The wooden bottom clattered, echoing against the frost. "Papa!" he shouted. "Papa, there's a baby out here!" When Thomas Turner reached him, older and slower and already fearful of such cries in a country that still whispered its old sins, he saw the woman's face and froze. The baby was alive. The mother was not. Beneath her right hand, partially uncovered by snow, was something else, an object wrapped in rough cloth and bound with hemp twine. Turner peeled the fabric back, expecting perhaps a Bible or the meager tokens enslaved women sometimes carried when they fled into the woods. But what lay inside was neither sacred nor ordinary. It was a piece of iron, hand-forged, pitted with old rust and shaped unmistakably like a shackle hammered open. Along its inner band were scratched letters, 3 initials, and a date, AMB 1849. That morning, the bell at the Methodist church rang earlier than usual. No Christmas cheer carried with it, only a toll for the nameless dead. The child, swaddled and silent now, was taken to the parson's wife. Word spread through the valley, and with it came questions that smelled like brimstone. Who was the mother? Where had she come from? And what kind of soul, living or dead, leaves behind both a newborn and a broken chain? Before we continue with the story of the woman the records forgot, and the horrifying truths unearthed beside her child, join our community of mystery lovers. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories like this one. By 1871, America was a country still bleeding beneath her bandages. The war had ended 6 years earlier, but the air still hung heavy with smoke and accusation. In Tennessee, the Reconstruction government shifted uneasily, creaking under the weight of rebellion and memory. The fields around Pulaski and Columbia were stitched with old scars, burnt barns, crumbling rail fences, the bones of mules that had perished for someone else's glory. The freed people who worked those lands carried strange combinations of hope and hunger. They had liberty in their mouths, but chains still in their dreams. Christmas of that year had come cold and mean. The Cumberland Plateau was locked in frost, and the hill roads near Elk River cracked under the wheels of wagons. The colored churches, small handmade tabernacles of pine and tar paper, had planned candlelight services to celebrate the birth of the Savior. But fear traveled faster than the gospel. Robed riders had been seen again, faces masked, declaring that the year of freedom had run its course. Even the whites who despised the Klan whispered uneasily that December. The federal garrisons had thinned. Newspapers, the Nashville Union, the Memphis Appeal, printed stories of nighttime raids and missing men. Yet there were other disappearances, quieter, rarely printed at all. Young women who had walked away from the remnants of plantations, seeking work in towns, and were never seen again. The woman found in the Turner field had no name when the sheriff arrived. Her dress was plain, mildewed cotton. One shoe, too large, dangled from her heel. The other was gone. Her hair had been cut crudely, perhaps to disguise her, perhaps as punishment. In her right ear, the lobe was split as though an earring had been torn from it. When Dr. Adkins, the town's physician, examined the body, He noted how her wrists bore faint marks, rings of calloused skin that could have been healed scars from long-removed irons. The baby, a girl not more than a few hours old, was healthy. The parson's wife, Mrs. Lang, bundled her in wool and christened her Grace, saying it was only fitting that mercy should follow such horror into the world. Outside, men spoke in low voices on porches. Some said the woman must have been one of the last runaways, hiding in the woods since emancipation, lost to reason by grief. Others claimed she'd been part of some strange ritual out in the snow, born of those African superstitions that the old planters used to whisper about. But those who had been enslaved themselves said little. They studied the shackle-turned keepsake, the etched initials, and knew better than to speak too soon. Because in the South of 1871, freedom had been declared, but safety was another matter entirely. The roads bore new scars of progress, telegraph poles like silent sentinels, railroad ties leading north, but the flesh of the nation still quivered under disease and debt. The Freedmen's Bureau, once a lifeline, had been gutted by politics. Planters reinvented themselves as landowners, demanding shares instead of sweat, controlling the newly freed through crop liens instead of chains. Preachers thundered about judgment from small pulpits, while women sewed remnants into quilts and prayed the next winter storm would pass them by. And through it all, Tennessee's hills carried the songs of people learning to breathe free air again. Camp meetings were held by lantern light. Fiddles played behind cabins, voices rose in secret, thick with sorrow and hallelujahs. Yet beneath that fragile joy ran a current of something older, a bone-deep dread that the old world had not, in fact, died. In Giles County, the land itself remembered too much. The Tanyard Creek ran red each spring from the tannin wash, but locals swore it was also from the blood of men who vanished there during the war. Stone chimneys still stood where entire settlements had burned. The pine forests whispered names if you walked alone, or so the children claimed. On Christmas Day, when the story of the dead woman reached the small courthouse town of Pulaski, it was treated at first as common tragedy, but days later, when Sheriff Dulaney attempted to record the discovery in the county ledger, he found something odd, an entry already there, dated weeks earlier, written in the neat hand of the district clerk. Notice of colored female, unidentified, possibly absconded, believed pregnant, property of deceased estate of Atkins Merriman. The same initials carved into the open shackle. That realization began a slow fever through the countryside. The Atkins Merriman estate had once been among the wealthiest holdings in Middle Tennessee, built on river cotton and human bone. Its patriarch, Colonel Hiram Merriman, had died in 1863, shot outside Fort Donelson. His widow, Eugenia Atkins Merriman, had survived him. An iron matron rumored it to have hidden gold and worse during the chaos of the surrender. By 1871, she lived mostly shut away in the crumbling house called Rose Hill, attended by a servant few had seen by daylight. If the woman in the snow bore connection to that dynasty, then the story was no mere tragedy. It was the reopening of a wound the rich had spent years burying. Outside the Turner farm, curious crowds came and went. The half-melted prints around the place suggested more than one traveler. A smaller trail led from the tree line, bare footprints in staggered pairs, indicating a struggle, or perhaps childbirth on the move. There were bloodstains on the lower rails of the fence, faint but distinct. Sheriff Dulaney ordered that section cut away and kept in the small lock-up barn behind his office. Some said he did it for evidence. Others believed he simply couldn't bear to let the land hold one more secret. The records tell little of what was discovered in the following days, but letters preserved in the Tennessee Historical Society give breadth to the scene. One, written by Dr. Adkins to his brother in Nashville on the last day of 1871, reads in its cracked ink, "There is talk among the freed colored of a woman who served at the Merriman place, Abra, or Abram, Something of that sound. The old mistress kept her close, claiming she was ill in the mind. I am told Abra was with child when she vanished into the cold. If the very same, then the chain we found proves more than cruelty. It may whisper of blood kin between master and slave, yet no one dare say it aloud. It is as though everyone here walks atop a grave they built with their own silence. In a nation trying to believe itself new, silence had become the cheapest currency. Outside, the holidays passed. Sleigh bells jingled in the richer towns, and belly laughs echoed through taverns where headed roasts turned on spits. But in the black quarters of Pulaski, women crossed themselves when the name Grace was mentioned. Old men shook their heads and muttered that the snow had not fallen right that year, that it came thick and deadened, like ash from a burnt Bible. Some said they saw lights beyond the ridge where the woman had died. Others claimed the cry of her newborn could still be heard on certain winds. And in the simple two-room parsonage where baby Grace slept, the parson's wife began to note strange dreams, a sound like chains dragged across wood, a whisper near the cradle saying not words, but a rhythm like the beat of a hymn carried from long ago. In January, as the thaw began, a federal marshal from Nashville rode into Giles County with orders that startled the sheriff. The file of the deceased woman was to be forwarded immediately, all artifacts included under federal jurisdiction. No reason given, no initials of authorizing officer, just a signature. A looping scrawl later identified as belonging to an investigator attached to the Bureau for Missing Freed Persons, a department that, according to Washington records, had been officially dissolved the previous year. Whatever it was the snow meant to hide, someone far beyond Tennessee still wanted it buried. The roads turned to rivers of mud as the temperature softened. Farmers cursed the weather, but beneath their grumbling a kind of waiting took hold. Part fear, part curiosity as word spread that a northern journalist had arrived by train from St. Louis, asking about a colored woman who birthed a ghost on Christmas Eve. He carried letters of introduction from the Freedmen's Mission and a notebook lined with blood-colored ink. From that moment, the story ceased to be local. What began as a nameless tragedy at the edge of a frozen field would soon unravel the remnants of one of Tennessee's proudest families and draw the gaze of both law and legend. And still, no one could explain what lay carved on that open chain, or why its hollow interior, when tapped, gave off a metallic ring that seemed strangely hollow, almost like a voice. In every great story of ruin, there are faces that shape the darkness, men and women who, by choice or chance, become the mirror through which we glimpse our own capacity for cruelty or compassion. The tragedy of the Christmas Eve woman, later called the Snowbirth case, was no different. It pulled half a county into its orbit, drawing out the hidden rot beneath gentility. The first of these was Eugenia Atkins Merriman, mistress of the once colossal Rose Hill estate. She had been born into wealth before the war, when cotton prices wrote scripture and slaves were capital. At 59, she was a specter of her younger self, tall, austere, wrapped always in mourning black. Her hair, white as frost, was knotted tight and concealed under veils. Her late husband's portrait stared forever from the parlor mantel. Colonel Hiram Merriman, Confederate officer, cotton magnate, rumored to be God to no one but himself. Those who still visited Rose Hill, traders or the occasional preacher invited for tea, remarked that the place smelled more of damp stone than life. Curtains never drawn back, chairs unused, silver dulled by disuse. The estate's fields, once combed by 100 enslaved hands, were now leased to tenants who worked them in exchange for a few sad coins and a barrel of cornmeal. Eugenia ruled the remnants of that ruined kingdom with chilly precision. Her servants, freed by law but still bound by fear, called her Ms. Genny. She kept to religious devotion with manic ritual. Each morning she sat before a walnut desk and wrote a letter, to whom none ever saw, and sealed it with red wax, unmarked. Each evening she had a maid place one white candle in every downstairs window, saying it kept the old blood from wandering. When investigators first approached her about the dead woman, the conversation played out like a parable of the Old South confronting the New Order. Sheriff Dulaney, broad-shouldered, beard streaked with gray, a veteran who bore the quiet exhaustion of men who fought the wrong war for what they hoped was the right reason, stood in the gloom of Rose Hill's foyer, hat in hand. "Ms. Merriman," he began, his breath frosting faintly, "we're asking if you recognize the lady found by the Turners on Christmas Eve. Folks say she might have worked your place some years past." The old woman's eyes, pale, green, sharp as glass, fixed on him. "Do you bring the color of snow into my home to speak of indecent fables?" she said evenly. "There were hundreds of servants before emancipation, Sheriff. One more lost to sin and winter does not warrant my memory." "She carried a child, ma'am," Dulaney replied. "Found with a chain piece marked AMB, dated 1849. That stopped her. For one soft flicker, grief, or recognition, crossed her face. Then her voice hardened. "You mistake coincidence for meaning," she said. "That mark is of my family, yes. We branded stock and tools alike. But we have no claim upon the dead." When Dulaney tipped his hat and left, the door closed behind him with the sound of a coffin lid. Inside, unseen, Eugenia leaned upon the desk and whispered, "Abra, did you go and wake the land?" No one was meant to hear, but her maid did, a gaunt mulatto woman named Livy, who had come to Rose Hill as a child slave and stayed through inertia, habit, and superstition. Livy would later swear to the parson that the mistress spent Christmas Eve awake until dawn, pacing the upper hall with a pistol and a prayer book. The next name breathed into the mystery was Parson Josiah Lang, pastor of the Pulaski Methodist Church, which had somehow survived occupation and Reconstruction unburned. He was a man in his 40s, but weariness lent him a stoop of 50. His congregation was split, half white farmers wary of his sympathy toward freedmen, half emancipated families grateful yet terrified to sit beside those who once owned them. He preached unity, albeit through clenched faith, and his wife, Abigail Lang, softened his message with compassion that often outshone his theology. After they took in the baby, the parsonage filled with a cautious light. Abigail named the infant Grace on Christmas Day, her hands trembling as she poured the baptismal water from a chipped china bowl. "Let her name undo what was done in the snow," she whispered. During those first nights, Josiah kept watch by the cradle, half out of pastoral duty, half because his wife seemed to hear sounds only she could describe. "One cannot help feeling she sees something in dreams," he confided to his sermon journal. "When Grace sleeps, the house hums faintly, as though a wind whistles only for her. The child's eyes are blue, uncommon hue for her mother's race, perhaps mixed lineage, perhaps the trick of light. Yet when she stirs before dawn, the shutters rattle though no breeze moves outside." Abigail's exhaustion deepened as weeks passed, and her husband faced the awkward interference of curious townsfolk. Christian charity wrestled with racial suspicion in every whispered conversation. "Reckon you'll keep it proper separate, parson?" one deacon asked him. "You know how gossip breeds. Ain't every one of your flock gonna sing amen to raising a, colored babe under your roof?" "God made her," Josiah replied quietly. "That's reason enough." But the look that followed told him how little God altered men's prejudices in 1871. Another key figure emerged from the lowlands outside town, a northern journalist by the name of Henry Whitlock, thin, lantern-jawed, 26, with the pale eyes of a man who slept little and wrote much. He wore a scuffed bowler and a wool coat too heavy for southern air. Whitlock had been a field clerk for the Union Army and stayed after the surrender as part of the Freedmen's Mission, documenting atrocities few others dared print. By the time he reached Giles County, his reputation for inconvenient honesty preceded him. He lodged at the boarding house above Miss Crale's millinery, keeping a notebook always near. "Strange weather for story hunting," the landlady said when he arrived, eyeing his northern accent. "Tragedies seldom adjust themselves to fair skies," he replied, smiling just enough to disarm her. He became a persistent figure around the courthouse, a ghost wearing spectacles, pressing for statements no one wished to give. When he saw the chain fragment, he spent hours sketching it by lamplight, muttering lines to himself. The iron unfastened, the womb of bondage delivered into frost. Of all who crossed paths with Whitlock, none gave him more pause than Sheriff Dulany. Both men carried war in their eyes. Over mugs of bitter coffee in the sheriff's office, they shared uneasy alliance. "You want truth," Dulany said on the second night. "I want peace. Round here, them two don't sit well at the same table." Whitlock tapped his notebook thoughtfully. "Peace built on silence isn't peace, Sheriff. It's aftermath." "You aim to print poetry?" "No, sir. Evidence." Delaney's jaw tightened. "Then I pray your ink's thick enough to stand blood, 'cause that's what tends to soak through first." Each exchange left the journalist more determined. Each silence he met more damning. He learned of eyewitness mutterings, a figure in a dark cloak seen crossing fields before the storm, a muffled cry near Rose Hill's boundary woods, but the words dissolved whenever he pressed for names. People in Giles County believed talk could conjure consequence, best not to leave sleeping haunts undisturbed. Lastly, history itself placed another quiet character in this unfolding account, the infant Grace. Though too young to act, she would become symbol, omen, and controversy. The few who saw her swore that by the second week in the parsonage, she smiled unnervingly at things behind them. Corners empty of any sound but the house settling in winter chill. Abigail Lang began leaving candles lit even by daylight, claiming the shadows lengthened more quickly around the cradle. And yet, paradoxically, when villagers visited, they felt peace near the child, an odor of hyacinth and milk amid the scent of wood smoke and lye. One widow declared, "That baby put hush in my bones, like the storm finally moved off." Contradiction defined every soul tied to this event. Eugenia Merriman, the proud relic of a decayed empire, concealing a lineage that might have dissolved purity into shame. Josiah Lang, the weary shepherd torn between Christian grace and the prejudice of his flock. Abigail, the tender pragmatist whose faith frayed under whispers in the nursery. Sheriff Dulany, the reluctant lawman navigating ghosts of law and conscience. Whitlock, the outsider with too much truth and not enough fear. And Grace, the silent heart of it all, breathing proof that new life can arrive wrapped in the shroud of old sins. As January deepened, these lives began to intersect more tightly. Each carried fragments of knowledge that together formed the outline of something unspeakable. Whitlock's notes grew darker in tone. Dulany began receiving anonymous letters sealed with black wax, warning him to let winter keep its dead. Abigail's dreams turned fevered. She told her husband she saw a woman's figure walking across their frozen garden at night, bare feet unmarked by frost. The figure would kneel, reach for the window, and whisper, "My name was Abra." Josiah dismissed it as grief transference, but when he checked the garden next morning, there were indeed small, melted patches where feet might have stood. From Rose Hill came no statement of sympathy, only silence, and, some nights, the far-off ringing of a bell at unholy hours. By mid-month, Henry Whitlock succeeded in obtaining a copy of the 1849 Atkins-Merriman inventory ledger from county archives. Hidden among lists of livestock and implements were 8 names under the heading Female Quarter Breeding. One entry read, Abra, housemaid, age 18, mulatto, trained. Valued $725. Noted unruly, scar left wrist from chaining. Productive. Following that, faintly penciled in another hand. Condition, expecting. Paternal, uncertain. Whitlock stared at the line until his pulse settled into slow dread. 18 in 1849 would make the woman 40 by 1871, theoretically barren. Yet she had given birth mere hours before freezing beneath the Turners' fence. The lifespan of cruelty had always been longer than flesh. Perhaps bloodlines could carry it farther still. Whether Abra lived as ghost, memory, or victim of vengeance, the investigation was about to pull every thread taut. Sheriff Dulaney prepared a summons for further questioning of Eugenia Merriman. Parson Lang steeled himself for the moral storm of raising a child born of scandal and superstition. And Henry Whitlock readied his next dispatch northward, knowing well it might end his career or his life. Outside, the thaw turned the whites of the fields to gray. Mud swallowed old tracks. Snowmelt ran red in furrows where wild hogs grazed. All of Giles County seemed to wait for something between revelation and reckoning. No one yet realized that buried beneath the Turners' fence was more than flesh. For a few weeks, the story seemed to rest. Townfolk spoke of it only when the church bell tolled or the whiskey ran low. The papers never printed more than a line or two. An unfortunate incident in Giles County. Unidentified colored woman found deceased in snow. Infant survived. And that, they thought, would be the end. But evil, in the South of 1871, had a habit of lingering beneath manners and lace. It began with a smell. Abigail Lang noticed it first. A faint sweetness that did not belong to winter. Like violets, but stale, she told her husband. Each morning before dawn, while he prepared sermon notes, she would step out to the parsonage porch and draw it in the freeze, listening for the creak of tree limbs. Some mornings she thought she heard, far off near the Turners' field, a woman humming. Always the same tune. Low, tuneless, almost like rocking an invisible child to sleep. Could be the wind through hollow wood, Josiah said, not looking up from his Bible. Winds don't hum lullabies. Grace, the infant, thrived outwardly. Round cheeks, quick breathing. But her sleep was restless. At times, when the fire dimmed the coals, she uttered a quiet half-cry that shifted in pitch like syllables on the edge of speech. Abigail would gather her up, whisper hymns, and feel the small tremor of the child's heartbeat against her own. When she sang in the bleak midwinter, Grace would go still, as if the melody were a language she already knew. By mid-January, more tangible strangeness surfaced. Neighbors on Chapel Road told the sheriff that wild dogs had begun to prowl at night, circling near the Turner property where the woman had died. Cows refused to drink from the trough closest to that fence. One evening, Eben Turner swore he saw figures, 3 or 4, walking the ridge, each holding a lantern that winked in and out like fireflies. He ran to fetch his father, but when they returned, nothing remained except footprints. Bare ones. "Colored folk can't afford to go traipsing barefoot, boy," Thomas Turner said, pushing his son inside. "And no right soul goes walking toward a grave they didn't dig." Even Sheriff Dulaney tried not to dwell on such tales. Officially, he still cataloged it all as coincidence. The wind, the thaw, local fever of imagination. But privately, he began keeping his pistol loaded at his desk and, when riding past Rose Hill, touched the crucifix his mother had given him before Chickamauga. There was something about that house again stirring, like an animal rousing after long sleep. Henry Whitlock, meanwhile, traveled deeper into the countryside, seeking the older freedmen who might have known Abra. Many shut their doors. A few spoke from behind curtains. One woman, bent with age and holding a wooden cross in her gnarled hand, told him, "You findin' names the white folks forgot on purpose, mister. Best you let 'em stay forgot. That one, Abra, she birthed trouble long before the snow found her." "What kind of trouble?" Whitlock asked. The woman blinked, eyes milky with cataracts. Kind the devil won't own and God can't forgive. She was blessed and cursed same breath. You ever see a shackle opened by its own will? When Whitlock said nothing, she whispered, "Then you don't know what kind of womb calls freedom its father." He left her cabin chilled in spirit. Later, when he reviewed his notes, he could not recall whether she'd said womb or tomb. The handwriting on the page looked the same either way. It was the first time the Northerner, so drunk on duty and reason, began to doubt the power of paper against superstition. That same week, inside Rose Hill, Eugenia Merriman fell ill. Her maid, Livy, claimed the mistress refused food, speaking instead to empty chairs. At night she wandered halls with a candle, pressing her palm against the wainscoting as though listening for heartbeats in the walls. "You hearing rain, Miss Guinea?" Livy asked one night, daring a glance. "Hush," said the mistress. "She knocks between boards. She's polite that way." "What do you mean? Who's she?" Eugenia's eyes glimmered like lamp glass. "The one who asked to be remembered." The maid crossed herself and shivered. By morning, the candle wax had pooled in shapes upon the parlor floor, ring forms, linked yet broken in one place. Livy scrubbed at them until her hands blistered, but the pale circles never quite faded. The doctor called it nervous affliction. Others whispered bewitchment. Meanwhile, at the church, Parson Lang prepared Sunday's lesson on redemption and found, wedged inside the hymn book, a scrap of rough cloth. He unfolded it to see a stain shaped faintly like a handprint. Written across the palm, in brownish ink or dried blood, were the same initials engraved on the chain, AMB. He stared, pulse fluttering, then burned the cloth in the stove before Abigail could notice. That night, however, Grace would not stop crying until he opened every window in the house, letting the night wind hiss through like breath from beyond. Such incidents multiplied. Farmers found calves dead with no tracks around them. Lanterns blew out without cause. The music from colored camp meetings sometimes carried a new refrain, a phrase sung not by any of the choir but rising behind them, off-key, woman-like. Still, the county's elite dismissed it all as post-war hysteria. The mind, they said, had not yet healed from the horrors of brother killing brother. Then came the thawing day when the Turners, clearing debris near the old fence, discovered another object lodged in the hard ground just where the body had lain. A small iron key, ornate, teeth worn smooth. Its bow was a circle snapped in half, soldered wrong, like two pieces joined against nature. Etched faintly along its shaft were 7 notches. Eben brought it to Sheriff Dulaney, proud of his find. The sheriff turned it in his palm, frowning. "Ain't no lock in the county fitted this sort of make," he murmured. "Some custom forge work, years back." "That mean treasure, Sheriff?" the boy asked. Dulaney shook his head. "Burying, not treasure." That night the key sat on his desk. When he returned from the privy, it had rolled itself to the ledger where he had written the name, Abra. He locked it in a drawer and tried not to think about it again. By February, even Henry Whitlock's tone shifted from investigative to fearful. His journal entries began blending facts with fever. Eugenia refusing all visitors, yet I saw an additional light in her upper window last eve, burned as if someone moved before it. Parson's wife reports dreams of chained cradles. When I passed the Turner field, the snow melted uneven, dark patches shaped like footprints facing backward toward the woods. He sent a telegram north, brief and cautious. "Please confirm whether Bureau investigator signed orders last month. Local unrest, possibly spectral. Require support." No reply ever reached him. Telegraph logs later showed the line functioning perfectly that day. At the end of February's first week, as Sunday service concluded, something peculiar happened inside the church. The congregation was mixed that day, white and black seated apart but within one room, a fragile act of progress belied by uncomfortable glances. Parson Lang had just read from Luke, "For nothing is hid, that shall not be made manifest." Then the northern wall groaned. Boards swelling through the air remained dry. A child screamed. The bell rope dropped of its own accord, ringing once clear and cold, though no one stood beneath it. Silence swept over the pews. The parson raised his hand to calm them and said, almost involuntarily, "She wants her name known." Abigail gripped the baby, frozen in place. On the small forehead of Grace, a bead of water formed, though no leak dripped from the ceiling above. That evening, Parson Lang walked the perimeter of his churchyard and found, etched shallow into the soil near the graves of 3 freedmen, the initial letters again. A.M.B. The ground smelled faintly, not of decay, but sweet, like violets left too long in a vase. He fell to his knees and prayed until dawn. Across town, in her silent manner, Eugenia Merriman stared into her mirror and saw a face behind her own reflection, a young woman's, eyes dark and steady, mouth curved not in malice, but in pity. The looking-glass cracked from corner to corner. By now, even the most rational began whispering that perhaps the snow had not merely covered a tragedy, it had sealed a covenant. Sheriff Dulaney, desperate for some sensible proof, rode to the Turner farm, intent on exhuming what ground remained under the fence line. The family protested, but he insisted. When the shovel struck the frozen layer, it rang strangely hollow, as if tapping wood. Beneath 6 inches of soil lay remnants of an old coffin, weathered, rotted. Inside, bones. The mother, Abra, had been placed then above her own ancestor's grave, or her own corpse had displaced an older rest. No record explained whose, but among the bones another small object surfaced, a rusted hinge, half of a manacle's clasp, identical in make to the shackle found that fateful morning. Dulaney held it up, mud dripping, and muttered, "Lord, forgive this county." From that moment forward, Giles earned a new reputation, a place where midnight winds sang of women unnamed. What the sheriff did next, and what Henry Whitlock published soon afterward, would ignite not simply superstition, but revelation, pulling Rose Hill and all its bloodlines toward loss far deeper than winter's grave. Early March brought thaw and scandal in equal parts. The earth softened, releasing both scent and memory, and with them rose questions the town could no longer drown in Sunday prayer. It was on the 11th of March, a Wednesday, that Henry Whitlock published the first broadsheet under his own imprint, The Snowbirth Inquiry, a record of injustice in Giles County. It combined the facts he could verify, date, temperature, witness statements, with suggestions he could not. He wrote of the shackle, the initials, and the odd federal request to seize the evidence. He hinted that the child's survival struck a blow against the silence of those who once trafficked in flesh. By sundown, 2 copies had been burned publicly outside the courthouse, while Sheriff Dulaney watched, jaw set. The townsmen called it slander. The newly freed families called it courage. For the first time since the war, both groups agreed on at least one thing: fear. That night, Whitlock found a letter slipped beneath his boarding-house door. It bore no signature, only a black wax seal impressed with a rose, its petals shaped like interlocked rings. Inside, on thick paper, a single line was written in flowing feminine hand. "Graves should not advertise themselves, Mr. Whitlock." He kept the note, but told no one. Meanwhile, the Merriman estate grew feverish with secrecy. Livy, the maid, came down the mountain one afternoon, trembling and near hysterical. She stopped at the parsonage, unable to contain herself. "Miss Janie's gone to diggin' in the orchard," she blurted through cracked lips. digging by lantern like the ground owe her something back. Planting? Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. No seed in them hands, ma'am, the servant said. Just a book and that little bit of chain. Abigail fetched her husband at once. Parson Lang rode out to Rose Hill under cloud-swollen skies, the air heavy with approaching storm. When he arrived, he found the mansion's grounds pocked with shallow pits, each half filled again, the earth disturbed as if indecisive whether to yield or hide. Near the porch stood Eugenia Merriman herself, mud on her morning gown, hands smeared and shaking. "Parson," she greeted him coolly, "you come to counsel or to accuse?" "I come to understand," he said, stepping down from his horse. "So few men crave that illness," she replied. "They prefer ignorance. It keeps their tongues innocent." "Mrs. Merriman," Lang said carefully. "Folks speak of strange things since Christmastide. The woman in the snow, she may have been yours to protect once." Eugenia's eyes narrowed. "Protect? I own no one. The law took that privilege from me, and I thank it daily." "Then why carry earth on your hands?" She looked down at the brown stains, then laughed softly, a hollow, terrible sound. "Because it's the only true church left, Reverend. The ground remembers, and I am teaching it how to forget." Lightning cracked above the hills. Lang saw, half buried beside the pit nearest her, the corner of a cedar box. From within came faint metallic clatter, like loose links shifting. "Leave this place," Eugenia warned him, voice trembling. "Grace belongs nowhere near what sleeps here." "Grace?" Lang asked, startled. Her back stiffened. Too late. She had spoken the name. "How do you know the child's name?" he pressed. Eugenia turned slowly. "Because I dreamed her before you did. She carries something of mine." Then, as thunder rolled, she lifted the lantern she'd been holding and hurled it into the half-dug pit. Flame burst upward, orange against the rain's first drops, and the parson fled under the burning smell of kerosene and rot. The following evening, the sheriff arrived at the parsonage door. He looked 10 years older than the week before. "We got a problem of grave robbing behind Merriman Place," he said. "Half the old tombstones turned, same as if somebody tried to dig 'em up, then thought better." "What are they looking for?" Lang asked. "That's the piece nobody answers." Eben Turner, the farm boy who'd first found the dead woman, gave one hint. He'd seen 2 riders near Rose Hill a few nights prior. White hoods, no torches. The Ku Klux were stirring again. They wanted Whitlock gone, the child baptized in quiet burial, the old mistress declared senile to preserve her fortune. And yet, strange contradiction ruled the county. One faction feared the woman's restless ghost. Another feared Whitlock's pen. By March's 3rd week, half the town believed grace to be a sign of emancipation's divine favor or its curse. Freedmen's women came secretly to the parsonage, begging to touch the baby's hand for blessing. Superstitious whites muttered that her crying at night summoned frost. Abigail Lang, weary to the core, refused further visitors. She no longer lit the cradle candles. The wax circles frightened her. "She hums, Josiah," she whispered one midnight. "When the fire dies, she hums, just under her breath, same tune that carried with the wind before." The parson knelt beside the cradle and listened, and indeed, under the sputter of coals, came the faint crooning of the old spiritual, "Hush, trouble water." But the notes came not from the infant's lips. They came from the iron shackle displayed on the mantel, resonating faintly like struck metal. Dr. Adkins, when summoned, scoffed. "Acoustics of the chimney," he said. "These walls hold their own voices." But that night, returning home, he found his surgery window open, frost on the sill though the air was mild. On his table lay the pages from Whitlock's printed report, rearranged to spell 3 words, "Let her speak." He fled to the tavern and did not sleep again until noon. Sheriff Dulaney, Caught between law and fever, resolved on a practical act, he would send the found relics, the key and both shackle fragments, to Nashville himself, bypassing whatever mysterious federal hand had claimed them earlier. He packed them in straw, sealed the crate, and stored it overnight in his locked office. The next morning, the crate was open. The straw remained, undisturbed. The relics were gone. No sign of break-in, no tool marks on the door. Only a trace of violet scent in the room, faint enough to doubt his senses. He did not report the loss. Instead, he wrote out to Whitlock, "If you wrote half the truth, mister, you best keep a pistol near. Someone don't care for reminders." "Who?" "Take your pick. Ghosts, widows, or gentlemen in white sheets. Difference is mostly wardrobe." Whitlock half smiled. "You don't believe it's superstition anymore, do you?" The sheriff looked away. Belief doesn't matter much when things start happening without permission. Then the deaths began. Livy, the Rose Hill maid, was found at dawn behind the smokehouse, lips blackened as though she'd swallowed lamp oil. Near her hand lay that same open key Dulaney had tried to ship away. Her last gesture seemed almost deliberate, fingers curled around it, pointing toward the orchard where Eugenia had burned the pit. When Dulaney arrived, the old mistress was sitting by her upstairs window, perfectly still, gazing toward the same orchard. "She was my last confessor," Eugenia said when told of Livy's death. "Now only heaven will hear me." "Then you'd best start talking," the sheriff said. She smiled faintly. "Would confession help the bones already awake?" "You mean that woman, Abra?" he demanded. "No, Sheriff," she said softly. "Not one woman, many. All those our men hollowed out and then forgot. Do you feel it? The ground breathing under us?" By week's end, Henry Whitlock transcribed her words in a shaking hand, sensing an admission beyond human crime. He began drafting a second broadsheet. Abigail, meanwhile, fell ill from exhaustion. When Parson Lang sat beside her bed, she clutched his sleeve and whispered, "Promise me you'll bury Grace nowhere near Rose Hill." "Why speak of burial, sweetheart?" "Because the nights keep coming closer." That same evening, Whitlock arrived at the parsonage, pale with purpose. "I've found a ledger in the courthouse exhumation files, proof that the Merrimans insured certain servant children against death. Paid policies continued after emancipation. Tell me, Reverend, have you noticed if the baby's eyes change color in the dark?" Lang's silence was answer enough. When the men glanced at the cradle, Grace was awake, staring. Her pupils reflected the lamplight with a metallic sheen. Neither moved until she blinked, and it vanished. Within days, Giles County became a theater of whispers. Farmers claimed lights moved underground mist. Recent graves sank or heaved in defiance of frost. In town, a colored boy selling papers shouted that the snowbirth articles had called judgment down. To quell panic, Sheriff Dulaney convened a night inquest inside the church. 12 townsmen, 1 federal officer from Nashville, 1 newspaper correspondent, Whitlock, present. They placed the surviving relic, the open key, recovered by Dulaney again from beside Livy's body, on the altar. Candles hissed in the cold air. "With conscience of God," Dulaney began, "we're here to settle what truth can be had, not what fancy writes." "I'll write nothing but what I see," Whitlock replied, pen already poised. The marshal from Nashville, a lean man named Hill, inspected the iron. "Workmanship northern," he remarked. "You say it opened nothing? Then it wasn't made to open, it was made to bind." "Bind what?" someone muttered. Hill shrugged. "Depends on who owned the forge." At that moment the candles flared blue, wax running like sweat. Wind rattled every shutter, though the night outside lay perfectly still. A shout rose from one of the men near the back. "Look to the gallery!" There, a shadow shaped like a woman stood between the rafters, outlines luminous as frost on glass. For one impossible instant, all saw her. The curve of shoulders, the round bundle clutched to her breast. Then the image dissolved in the sudden dark, leaving candle smoke choking the air. When light returned, the key on the altar had split clean in two. The marshal fled first, horse pounding north before dawn. The remaining witnesses swore themselves to silence. Whitlock refused. He sent a telegram to the St. Louis Tribune. Manifestation witnessed by 12 reputable men. Justice not of this world interfered tonight. The wire never arrived. Telegraph clerk later claimed a woman's voice interrupted midway, speaking at both ends of the line. Soon the rumors hardened into curse. Some claimed the ghost's appearance meant God's wrath for generations of bondage. Others that the devil had found a cradle. Either way, vengeance required target. And in Reconstruction, Tennessee, targets were never long choosing. On the night of March 27th, riders gathered, white sheets glinting beneath lantern glow. They moved toward the parsonage, intending to restore order. The sheriff intercepted them at the ridge, rifle across his saddle. "Ain't a man among you got stomach to ride barefaced?" he shouted. "You kill that babe, you damn yourselves twice over. Once to law, once to heaven." For a moment they hesitated. Then one voice from behind the hoods answered, "Heaven turned its back when she was born in the snow." The first shot tore through Dulaney's hat brim. He returned fire. Chaos scattered the line, horses screaming, men cursing. Amid the thunder and smoke, lightning split the sky again, revealing beneath the cloud a vision no gun could kill. The fields of Rose Hill glimmering silver, and among them dozens of faint figures rising through the ground mist, women and children, shapes of frost and moonlight, walking toward the town. The riders fled, leaving their torches behind. Some swore later that the flames bent backward, as though chased by wind from below. Dulaney, bleeding from a shoulder graze, reached the parsonage at dawn. He found the front door open, Abigail standing in the hall, hair undone, the child in her arms. She looked at him with calm beyond reason. "She says it's nearly time," she whispered. "Who says?" "The one who froze so her baby could breathe." Then Grace glanced over her mother's shoulder, eyes again brassy with reflected fire, and smiled. By morning, the entire county understood that something beyond law now possessed their story. "What do you think?" Whitlock later asked Dulaney, both men too worn for courtesy. "Guilty souls cursed by God, or victims of madness?" The sheriff looked past him toward the whitening hills. "Both, maybe. Sometimes God needs madness to finish what men begin." "What do you think, guilty souls cursed by God or victims of madness? Tell us below. Your theories matter here." The final days of March 1871 dawned with air that felt stretched thin, like the county itself was holding its breath. Crows no longer came near the Merriman property. The bells in Pulaski rang for reasons no one would explain. The church clock desynchronized from the courthouse by exactly 13 minutes and never again struck in unison. Something, it seemed, had taken the measure of time and found it unworthy. Sheriff Dulaney awoke on the 29th to pounding at his door. It was the Turner boy, Eben, mud to his knees and terror in his throat. "Mr. Sheriff," he gasped, "the Merriman place. It's burning, sir, but the fire don't spread right. It burns down, not up." Dulaney threw on his coat and mounted up. By the time he reached Rose Hill, a dozen onlookers had gathered at road's edge. Black smoke coiled from windows like slow snakes. Yet the rain still fell, and each drop that touched the roof hissed into steam. "Where's the mistress?" Dulaney shouted. Inside, through heat and shadow, he found Eugenia Merriman seated upright in the parlor armchair, perfectly untouched by flame. The walls blazed around her, but a circle of unburnt floor spread like sanctuary beneath her feet. She held the split key in her lap, fingers folded over it like prayer. "I tried to keep them asleep," she murmured as he approached. "But their tongues have memory." "Who, ma'am?" She raised her eyes, startlingly clear amid soot. "The ones we bought and sold. Chains remember shape, Sheriff. Iron dreams of wrists." A beam cracked overhead. Delaney lunged to drag her up, but she resisted, whispering over and over. "She's come for the child." "Who's come?" he demanded. Eugenia breathed one word through the roar. "Abra." A roar deeper than flame reverberated underfoot, as if the very ground heaved. The sheriff pulled her bodily toward the door. The moment they crossed the parlor threshold, the ceiling collapsed behind them. Sparks showered into rain. She did not cry out. Outside, the onlookers swore they saw something rise within the fire. A silhouette of a woman, cloaked in embers, an infant cradled against her chest. The image floated upward until it met the clouds, then vanished like breath in the cold. By dawn, Rose Hill was ash. Only its stone foundations and the old orchard remained. In the rubble, Delaney found the shackle fragments fused together by heat into a seamless ring. No forge could have achieved such weld without visible metal, but here it was, whole again, mocking man's idea of craft. Henry Whitlock spent that night in feverish writing. His notes, later discovered among his effects, blurred fact and dread into one long scrawl. "If sin can breed in soil, this county is its seedbed. The woman Abra, no invention. Her offspring line persists not through life, but through remembrance. The child bears blood of master and enslaved both, making her altar to two gods. Mrs. Merriman sought to seal her within iron, root her out from genealogies. The snow only delayed what earth insists upon revealing, that none of us bury guilt deep enough." At dawn, he carried these pages to the parsonage, intent to warn Lang that danger still walked, but what he found inside stilled him more completely than any specter could. Abigail Lang lay faint on the settee, soot smudged on her hands though she had not gone near the fire. On the kitchen table sat the infant's cradle, empty. "She took her," Abigail said hoarsely. "Who?" Whitlock demanded. "The woman from the glass." The parson entered moments later, coat torn, face wild. "The child vanished. I was at the Merriman ruins, saw lights, came home and the door stood wide." Together they searched yard and barn, finding only infant prints in ash drifted from the distant fire. Toward sundown they followed the path up the ridge past the Turner farm, where the snow that lingered gleamed faintly despite cloud cover. In the hollow ahead, they found the woman. Not spectral this time, but flesh, skin gray with cold, eyes fathomless. She knelt in the black mud, holding baby Grace against her breast. Steam rose around them, though the air should have frozen it. "Abra?" Whitlock said, unable to stop himself. The woman turned. Every scar spoke, older than the war, older than freedom. From her wrist fell the faint shimmer of iron dust. "She is yours now," Abra said, voice echo low, as if spoken from cavern or coffin. "I carried her through fire. Let her speak, or she will die silent like we did." Then she pressed her lips to the child's brow and crumbled, body collapsing inward to a drift of snow, uncorrupted, soundless, gone. The baby cried once. Around them, the ash-tinged air smelled again of violets. Parson Lang fell to his knees. "Lord have mercy," he stammered. "What manner of deliverance is this?" Whitlock could not answer. He wrapped the child in his coat, half fearing to feel weight, but she was solid, warm, alive. The sheriff arrived by lantern light minutes later, jaw slack with disbelief at the sight. Together they carried motherless Grace back toward town. The next day, the sun returned. Buckets of bright water poured over the valley from a blue too clean for what had occurred, yet none found peace. The townsfolk gathered at the ashes of Rose Hill, muttering prayers. When they began to dig a grave for the old mistress, they uncovered instead a warren of shallow coffins, one stacked upon another. Crude pine boxes rotted open to reveal bones small as dolls. Charred fragments of brass nameplates bore carvings in both Latin and English. Servus nascitur, servant born. Eugenia had been right. The estate was a crypt long before its fire. Word spread faster than contagion. Freedmen and former overseers converged together, staring down into that pit of unnumbered dead. Even the clan riders, stripped of costume, turned pale. For the first time since the war, guilt had taken shape palpable enough to silence hatred. Henry Whitlock recorded every detail, scribbling through tears. "History will not believe me," he muttered, "but ink must." By evening, the sheriff ordered every coffin reburied properly in the public cemetery, names unknown. Abigail Lang sang a hymn until her voice failed. Grace, quiet at her breast, reached one tiny hand toward the eastern sky, as if greeting someone unseen. That night, under crescent moon, the exhumed bones glimmered faintly. Some said with frost, others with forgiveness. Yet the horror had one further act to play. Near midnight, long after the gravediggers had gone, Whitlock remained in the cemetery, transcribing headstone inscriptions by lamplight. The lamp sputtered, shadows leaping across the mound where Grace's mother once lay unburied. He heard a voice. Not wind, not woman, but the drawn iron scrape like the closing of a great gate. Then, within the soil, a whisper, "Write the truth." "I have," he said aloud. The whisper came again, closer, as if through the pen in his hand. "Write it not for the living." The ground pulsed. One slow swell, the sound of thousands breathing together. The lantern light dimmed, and he saw, with awful clarity, hundreds of faint outlines pressing against the surface below. Hands, faces, ribs, like soft clay molded up by yearning. He stumbled backward, fell, but the vision did not follow. It sank quietly, the earth resettling, accepting its due. When he returned to town, blood dripped from his bitten tongue where he'd held his scream. He went straight to the sheriff. "They want witness," he said, "not revenge." "Ghosts want peace like men want money," Delaney muttered. "Never enough. Then I'll write until I run out of ink." The following morning, the county awoke to find the Pulaski Banner printing a full confession, Eugenia Merriman's dictated words, signed before the fire. "I name my sins not for pardon but for record. The woman Abra was my husband's daughter, born of conquest, sold once to repay debt, bought back for shame. I sought her erasure. Heaven sought her voice. Her child's cry broke the frost on Christmas Eve. Where my house stood shall stand remembrance." Every copy vanished within hours. Some burned, others treasured secretly. The courthouse archivist later swore no such document had ever reached his office. Yet one tattered page survived in Nashville's library, brittle and half-scorched, bearing that same final line. Through April, ordinary life returned reluctantly. The fields thawed, new cotton sprouted. Freedmen's schools opened at last under federal guard. The parson preached resurrection with new humility. God buries nothing uncounted. But in subtle ways, the county remained changed. Stories told by river fishermen spoke of a woman walking fog banks at dawn, singing softly to a baby none could see. Travelers on the Nashville Road sometimes found fresh violets laid across the milestone labeled Merriman's Fork, even in months when the flowers should have been long dead. Grace herself grew, a quiet, watchful child, with eyes neither fully blue nor brown, but a strange alloy hue. People said she could calm animals by touch, that she cried when lies were told near her. Whites, who once whispered curse, began calling her blessing. When the decade turned, another war already distant, Henry Whitlock sent north the manuscript of his notes, serialized under the title, The Woman in the Snow. No publisher dared print it. He died in 1880 from fever contracted in the Delta, and his papers passed to the Freedmen's Mission Archive, where they slept unheard for nearly a century. But those who remained in Giles County remembered differently. They said that on certain Christmas Eves, snow would fall only upon the hill where Rose Hill once stood, covering nothing else. Those who approached heard faint iron chime, as if a shackle somewhere below still opened and closed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. That Christmas, 1871, closing service in the Methodist Church drew more souls than any before. The parson read from Matthew, "For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed." He paused then, added, "And sometimes what's revealed chooses its own hour." Abigail cradled Grace in the front pew. When the final hymn began, the wind outside turned strangely warm, moving through the congregation like unseen wings. Later, as candles were snuffed one by one, Josiah looked toward the doorway. For one heartbeat he saw her, Abra, standing there in quiet dignity, neither smiling nor weeping, the snow beyond glowing like someone had spread moonlight underfoot. Then she was gone, leaving only the faintest scent of violets. If you stood in that room, would you call it crime or sacrifice? Leave your answer. By spring of 1872, Tennessee had almost convinced itself that peace had truly arrived, but Giles County knew better. The ruins of Rose Hill stood black against the new green. Farmers plowed around them the way sailors circumnavigate reefs that have already claimed ships. The state fire inspector listed the cause simply as providence, a word that looked respectable in ledgers, yet explained nothing. Sheriff Dulaney resigned before midsummer. His official reason? Health and lingering war wounds. The unofficial? Each time he polished his badge, he swore he smelled frost. He moved west, remarried, and never again spoke of the woman in the snow. When he died years later in Arkansas, his widow sold his effects. Inside a cigar box, buyers found a fused iron ring, the size of a manacle, wrapped in velvet. None could separate the metal. Parson Lang remained at his pulpit, though his sermons gentled into parables rather than thunder. Congregants said he spoke more of mercy than of judgment, as if haunted by how easily the two had traded places that winter. He and Abigail raised Grace until she was 12. Then, according to faded church minutes, the child went north for schooling with aid from charitable friends. In truth, Whitlock's estate, liquidated after his death, had provided the funds. His executor wrote one line: "The journalist believed education is the only sort of exorcism that lasts." Abigail never entirely recovered her health, yet she outlived her husband by 2 years, enough to see railroads stretch through cotton fields that once hid bodies. She left behind a small notebook of hymns rewritten in words of her own, one titled "Snow on Freedom." Its final verse read simply, "What we bury will speak, if we listen long enough." The freed community of Giles held fast to that message. When, late in 1873, the county supervisors debated relocating the cemetery bones to less valuable land, 300 men and women, formerly enslaved, now tenants and preachers and blacksmiths, stood with shovels across their shoulders outside the courthouse. No violence followed. The motion was tabled. History might call it mundane bureaucracy, but locals called it the first time the dead had protected the living. Over the next decades, the story migrated the way rivers do, slowly, widening banks, changing color. Newspaper retelling softened it. The mysterious charity child of Pulaski, the burning manor, the ghost bell at Rose Hill. Yet in every version remained a kernel unowned by sensation. The idea that guilt can ignite as surely as kerosene, and that a mother's refusal to disappear may redraw a whole county's conscience. By 1900, the orchard where Rose Hill once stood had become a picnic ground. Children played where beans grew over the scorched foundations. On Christmas Eves, they dared each other to press ears to the earth and claim to hear humming. Most heard only silence, but a few swore to a lullaby older than memory. Grace Lang. She eventually took the name Merriman Lang, graduated from a teacher's academy in Boston, then returned briefly to Tennessee around 1895. Records list her as principal of a one-room school for colored children near Lawrenceburg. A journalist from the Nashville American visited and described her eyes of singular metallic light. He asked why she came back. "So the ground remembers rightly," she told him. "It forgets too easily." 2 years later, she vanished from public record. Perhaps marriage, perhaps movement west with Reconstruction teachers. None could say. But each Christmas, a letter arrived at the Pulaski Church bearing no return address, only containing a pressed violet. Giles County carried the reputation quietly into the 20th century. Outsiders laughed at its superstition. Locals lowered their voices when clouds thickened over the hills. The ruins of the manor finally fell under Barnes and kudzu, but the stones of its foundation remained pale compared to the soil around them. Farmers said plows struck metal there that sang like a bell before rusting again by morning. Occasionally, historians revisited the event with skeptical precision, possibly a case of postpartum delirium, perhaps self-inflicted death exaggerated by freedman folklore. But their reasoning bent under the same weight that had broken Eugenia's will. Some acts are too complex for simple crime reports or miracles. The human consequences proved more documentable. Federal investigators, awakened belatedly by Whitlock's papers, audited 24 estates across Middle Tennessee. They uncovered insurance fraud, trafficking ledgers, the sale of infants taken from slave quarters before Emancipation Proclamation reached them. None of this erased Abra's suffering, but it transformed her legend into evidence. Between 1874 and 1876, 5 convictions were filed. Modest justice, but in those years rare as snowflakes in July. A curious footnote. Each of the convicted men reported the same recurring dream in prison. A woman walking through frost, holding a child, saying only, "You know me now." Time blurred pity into folklore, then folklore into tourism. By the 1930s, ghost hunters visited Snowbirth Hill. During the Civil Rights era, activists in Pulaski reclaimed the story's truth, naming it not haunting but reckoning. Grace's lullaby became a freedom hymn, recorded by field musicians who never knew her surname. Hearing it, elders often wept. Some said they smelled violets when the final note faded. To this day, the county map marks that spot with a small symbol. Historic site, burnt manor. Beneath its coordinates lie layers of ash, iron, and forgiveness intertwined. On the coldest nights, even the skeptics admit the ground there feels warm underfoot. No trial, no jury, no theologian ever explained why the Christmas snow spared the child or how iron sealed itself in fire, but perhaps it never needed explanation. Perhaps in 1871, a single woman's defiance cracked open the silence of an age, proving that memory, once woken, does not sleep again easily. And perhaps that is horror's truest shape, not the scream in darkness, but the centuries-long echo of a voice once forbidden to speak. So what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled? Or was it buried anew to preserve the pride of the powerful? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep digging into America's darkest history, like this video and subscribe for next week's story. The snow that fell on Giles County in 1871 covered far more than one mother and child. It buried a nation's fever, and when it melted, the fever rose again. Each generation since has tried to smooth that ground, to forget the sound of iron breathing under it. Yet the wind still carries a tune. When history shivers, it is her lullaby returning, asking who among us will listen this time. The woman they called Abra never wanted worship, only witness. Every scar she bore became a sentence in the story we read tonight. Every secret we keep adds another verse to that same song. Listen closely, before the frost begins again. Ascern, so what do you believe? Was this truth unveiled or buried once more to shield the living from their guilt? Write your theory in the comments. If you want us to keep unearthing America's deepest shadows, like this video and subscribe for next week's Chronicle.